welcome to this week's AI-generated podcast. This week we have the message from Peter Williams, which has been creatively titled The Floating Pulpit and the Miraculous Harvest. There's some valuable context in here on how this parable was delivered. I hope you find these podcasts of interest, and if you do, give us a like so we know. God bless. See you next time.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are unpacking a fascinating stack of sources. We've got historical commentaries, architectural notes, even some psychological analysis.
It's all centered on one story.
Right. The parable of the sower from the Gospel of Mark. But we're not just retelling it. We want to look at the physics, the farming, all the stuff behind the story.
Exactly. We're going to get into why a boat isn't just a boat, why first century farming looks, kind of incompetent to us, and why we've probably been hearing the ending all wrong.
Okay, let's start with the setting. The sources talk about this Bay of Parables on the Sea of Galilee. Is that just a nice name, or is there something more to it?
Oh, it's entirely physical. It's geology, really. Yeah. The sources all point to this natural acoustic phenomenon.
Like an amphitheater?
Precisely. The slope of the banks, combined with how sound travels over water, it acts like a huge natural amplifier. You didn't need a sound system.
You could just stand in a boat offshore
and your voice would carry clearly to thousands of people on the hillside.
Which explains the logistics. But the text also paints a pretty intense picture before he even starts teaching. It says the crowd was very large, but the context suggests something more.
It was dangerous. The Greek word implies a crushing weight. Think of a panic situation at a stadium or the tube during rush hour.
So this isn't a calm Sunday service.
Not at all. It was a mob. Jesus getting into the boat wasn't just for the sound check. It was a tactical move for safety. He had to get some space so he could actually be seen and heard without being trampled.
So he gets into Simon Peter's boat. And here's a detail that I had never really connected before. The notes say he sat down to teach. That sounds so casual to me.
It seems that way, but it's the opposite. In that culture, you would stand to read scripture.
Okay.
But you would sit to explain it. It was the posture of authority. When a rabbi sat, that meant class was officially in session. He was basically turning the lake into a sanctuary.
And that actually connects to something else in the research, this architectural idea. The nave of a church. I've heard that word 1,000 times.
And it comes straight from the Latin word navis.
Which means?
Ship. The whole design of a classic cathedral is meant to look like an overturned boat.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is that the church is a vessel of salvation.
So every preacher in a pulpit is sort of, recreating this moment, the floating pulpit.
That's the symbolism.
Exactly. That's a great image. So he's in this floating pulpit, and he tells a story about a farmer. But the method, throwing seed on paths and rocks and thorns, it sounds so wasteful.
Right, because we think in terms of precision. But you have to imagine the technique back then is called broadcasting. You'd have a bag of seed over your shoulder, and you'd just scatter it in a wide arc.
So you couldn't really aim for just the good soil.
You couldn't. It was an indiscriminate, liberal scattering. That was just the way it was done. You had to cover the whole field, which meant some seed would inevitably land on the path or the rocky bits.
Okay, so that explains the 4 outcomes. Birds get some, the sun scorches some, thorns choke the others, and finally some hits good soil. And the usual takeaway is a kind of personality test, right? Which soil are you?
That's the classic reading. Though our psychological sources, they really push back on that. They suggest it might not be 4 different types of people.
But 4 phases in one person.
Or even 4 states at the same time. You might be good soil at work, you listen, you apply things, you grow, but you might be rocky ground in your relationships with no real depth. It's about selective hearing.
That hits home. And honestly, I usually just end up feeling guilty when I read this. Like I'm the thorny ground, worried about money or whatever. It feels like the point is that I'm not trying hard enough.
And that is exactly where Susan Derber's analysis flips the whole thing on its head. She says, by focusing on our own failures, am I rocky, am I thorny, we completely miss the actual punchline of the story.
Which is the harvest.
It's the size of the harvest. Look, in Palestine at that time, getting a 10-fold return on your crop, that was a good year. 7-fold was about average.
And Jesus talks about 30, 60, 100-fold.
It's miraculous. It's an absurdly abundant number. Derber's point is that despite the birds and the rocks and the thorns, despite all the reasons it should fail, the harvest happens anyway. And it's huge.
So the focus shifts from the quality of the soil to the power of the seed.
Yes. It's not about us trying harder. It's about what the seed itself does. The call to action isn't just be better soil. The sources say it's think, listen, accept, and act. It's about deep listening, letting the message actually sink in.
It brings it all back to that floating pulpit, doesn't it? If the church is a vessel and the message is the seed, maybe we spend too much time staring at the rocks in our lives.
Instead of anticipating that 100-fold harvest, that's the thought to hold on to. Don't get fixated on the thorns. Watch for the grain.
Thanks for exploring this deep dive with us. We'll catch you on the next one.